The anime begins by showing the announcement of the 13th Imperial Prince. Although he is only a newborn, he possesses consciousness because he has reincarnated. Upon revealing his abilities, he realizes that he has an affinity with water, and that his rank is SS. The king decides to name him Noah Erat, and all the nobles are impressed by his talent at such a young age. 6 years after reincarnating, the protagonist has learned to clearly see his statistics, since his power comes from the number of subordinates he possesses. As for his level, it can increase infinitely, although for now he remains at level 1. The protagonist has several maids. Evelyn is one of them, and stands out for being elegant and beautiful, and she is in charge of attending to him at any time. She informs him about the arrival of the Crown Prince and the 4th Prince. The protagonist goes to see his brothers. Albert, the Crown Prince, gives him a sword as a gift. The protagonist senses a negative aura from it and sees the laments of those who once served Albert, but since it was a gift he could not refuse it, so he takes it carefully. Albert explains that it is the most powerful water magic sword in the Empire, called Leviathan. More than 120 people died trying to tame its power, but the protagonist was able to endure it because he has an SS affinity with water. Albert put him to the test, and since he survived holding it, he says that with time he will be able to use it. The protagonist is annoyed because he was put to the test, but he stays silent to avoid getting into trouble. At night, Zoe, one of the maids, seems unmotivated. When the protagonist asks her what is wrong, he realizes that she is like this because there was a flood in her hometown and her family is having a hard time. That is why she has been thinking about resigning to go be with them. The protagonist decides to give her mother a job so that she can feel more at ease. In addition, he provides her with a salary and lodging near the capital. He does this to prevent Zoe from having to work in a brothel and having her reputation tarnished. In addition to that, he asks his butler Dylan to go and buy all the land possible in Zoe's village in order to protect the affected families before someone else takes advantage of their situation. The problem is that the protagonist does not have enough resources for that, so he orders the sale of some land that was gifted to him in order to buy the other land and better help the village. The next day, the 4th Prince, named Henry, visits his brother to talk to him about the sword. After conducting a brief investigation, he discovered that the sword possesses a will of its own. It is said that it only obeys the one it recognizes as its master. Henry recommends not using it to avoid a tragedy. Later, the protagonist and his subordinates travel to the lands he wants to buy and realize the extent of the disaster. The houses are destroyed and the crops are rotting. In addition, the food that is usually distributed is in poor condition, but the people cannot complain about what they are given. The protagonist cannot believe that the Empire provides food of such poor quality. At that moment, the person in charge of that area appears. Geralt arrives to inspect the food. Upon seeing how bad it is, he congratulates his employees on their work. The protagonist, hidden under a hood, confronts him, asking whether he is keeping the money that is given to help in these cases. Geralt, seeing that it is a child, justifies his actions by mentioning that he has to gain something from what he is doing. The protagonist reminds him that he is committing a crime by enriching himself with aid meant for the victims, and that crime carries the death penalty. He also compares the sword to Geralt, since both abuse their power. Leviathan becomes angered and acts of its own will, appearing before the protagonist. He tries to take it, but it rejects him, showing that he is not worthy. However, the protagonist manages to wield it, showing it that there is someone stronger than it. After this, he decapitates Geralt for trying to attack him. Leviathan is not satisfied and acts on its own. The protagonist manages to stop it in time, although its attack creates an extremely deep pit, so he must be very careful when using such power. Shortly after, Lehen, the commander of the Knights of Dosso, arrives. Upon seeing what has happened, he rushes to apologize to the prince for the incident. The protagonist asks him to take care of Geralt's accomplices. In addition, he orders that more good quality food be prepared and that the portions be increased. On the other hand, Albert receives the report of what happened in Dosso. He is pleased to learn that his brother will be useful by being able to control the sword. The king summons his youngest son to thank him for the decision to sell the land he had given him and purchase the land in Dosso, since thanks to that they saved resources that would have been spent dealing with 2 catastrophes. He also learned that he managed to tame Leviathan and is interested in knowing what his current of power is. When the protagonist is evaluated, it is revealed that he now has an SSS affinity with water. Simply by taming the sword, his power has grown, and the king hopes to rely on his strength in the future. The protagonist heads toward the capital of the Maya's empire, known for being the most prosperous city. There, he stops to listen to a singer named Alaki, who is promoting herself. In the middle of this, three men interrupt to collect a debt left by Alaki's father. They suggest that she sell her body to get the money. The protagonist intervenes, mentioning that what they are doing is a crime, since debts are not inherited. One of the men grabs the protagonist by the neck and lifts him. The latter invokes Leviathan and, with his dark energy, overwhelms them. The three men flee the place in fear. The protagonist gives a card to the manager of the place in case the gang returns to bother him again. He also promises Alaki to pay her every month so she can improve her singing and afford her mother's medical treatment. Later, upon returning to the mansion, the protagonist notices that the gang has arrived to apologize. However, he does not receive them and decides to throw them out of the place because he wants to make them understand that he is still furious with them. Henry notices his younger brother's attitude and congratulates him for it. He compares him with his other younger brothers and realizes that he has the maturity of an adult despite his age, although even though they are brothers, not all of them share the same mother. Henry changes the subject and asks him about the sword. The protagonist shows him that he can now use it, takes it out from his sleeve, and leaves his brother impressed. He tells him that the same sword taught him how to hide it and change its size. At night, the gang continues waiting to be received. Their leader grows tired of the situation and threatens the protagonist. The latter uses a little of the sword's power to intimidate him, forcing him to kneel. Much later, the protagonist attends a nobles' party organized by Raydock. Upon entering, everyone is amazed to see him carrying the national treasure. One of the guests thinks it is just a toy. The sword Leviathan is offended and releases its corrosive aura, which affects everyone. With a single word, the protagonist controls it and proves that he truly is the bearer of the legendary weapon, earning even more admiration from those present. After that, the nobles formally introduce themselves to him. One of them is Byron, who brings his adopted daughter Cindy. The protagonist realizes that she is a slave. Byron tells him that he decided to buy her because of her intelligence and has been teaching her everything he knows. The protagonist likes her way of acting and gives her recognition in front of the others. Although, to tell the truth, what caught his attention the most was the girl when he used the power of his sword, since she was the only one to notice the danger in order to protect her father. The next day we meet Oscar, the 8th Imperial Prince. He invites his brother to look for treasures in the ancient market. There, the protagonist finds Andrea's grimoire, known for being a legendary mage. Just by touching it, his affinity with the wind element increases. Leviathan begins to stagger. The protagonist realizes that the grimoire also contains a will of its own and draws his sword. The grimoire releases the trapped spirit of the mage. The protagonist does not hesitate and destroys it with the power of Leviathan. Oscar is impressed to see that his brother is so powerful at such a young age. Suddenly, a merchant approaches because he wants to show the protagonist an object he has in his antique shop. It is a legendary ring that only reveals its true form to its rightful owner. The merchant has tried to find its owner, but still has not succeeded. He even threw it away several times, but the ring always returned. The protagonist tries on the ring, and it immediately recognizes his power. The ring begins to melt and turns into a powerful suit of armor. Later, Zoe comes to pick up the protagonist. At that moment, the gang leader appears to attack him. However, the protagonist uses his ring, creating a shield that protects him. Oscar is astonished, and his brother explains that he linked the ring with the sword Leviathan. In this way, he can activate an automatic defense. Much later, the protagonist returns to listen to Alaki sing. There, he realizes that many alcoholics enter the place, so he confronts them and throws them out. He asks the owner not to let that type of people in, but the owner cannot do anything because they are the ones who spend the most. In that case, the protagonist decides to buy the entire place so that people can come and peacefully enjoy the music.